Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another chapter of Experience Interviews. And today we're lucky to have on this lovely couple that I've just met recently. Their names are George and Judith Arseneau. Returning guests, we've got Denise Stoner on today. So George was born in New Brunswick, Canada, and was a brother in the Jesuit order. After leaving the Jesuits, he was involved in La Compagnie des Jeunes Canadiens in Montreal. Judith was a teacher in Pennsylvania for special needs children. When George and Judith met as adults in Montreal, life changed as vivid memories of being experiencers together since early childhood came rushing in. They spent several months processing these experiences and reconnecting consciously with the beings that had picked them up as children and brought them together throughout their lives. This connection continues to this day. They developed a spiritual retreat center in Michigan where they taught classes in metaphysics, parapsychology, and spiritual transformation. They were also guided to build a 21-foot three-sided pyramid, which was designed by a friend and was primarily used for meditation. When they moved to Florida, they continued to teach classes in spiritual transformation. They are also currently administrators of a Florida nonprofit organization called Angels of Hope, Love is Real, which has several projects involving children and seniors. They have been involved in ufology all their lives and are now MUFON field investigators in Florida and are a part of MUFON's experiencer research team, which is designed to assist experiencers as they tell their story, perhaps for the first time, and truly need an open listener. So, George and Judith, thanks for coming on, and Denise, thanks for making the introductions. So, thanks for all three of you for coming on.
And thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, George, do you want to start and explain wherever you would like to start and then how we met?
Oh,
Okay.
how we met. I would like Judith to tell our story in the beginning anyway, and I'll chime in.
Yeah. Well, it actually we'll start our story from the beginning.
Here.
But here in this lifetime, but it's most interesting, again, as Denise was saying, how we met and what was occurring at that point. But when George and I were children, I was living in New York. I was born in New York, and George was born in New Brunswick in Canada. And as infants, we have memories of these beings that we know, and they are humanoid, a little taller than human-like, and more chiseled in their features, very precise and very pure looking. Everything is so balanced. And when we were infants, both of us had the experience of having these beings looking into our crib. Actually, George, he usually went out of his crib onto the floor, so I don't know what they did, whether
they followed me
they
around. They found me under the bed.
Right. But we have great memories of those eyes as infants that were almost so piercing and so precise is what we can say, and so exact.
There was a male and a female, and the male was very tall. He was, like Judith said, there was a chiseled feature, but very handsome. What you could see from him and her was a tremendous compassion and love. And we came to know these beings later on. They've been with us ever since.
And when we were having memories rushing in, it never really occurred other than as we were growing up and our young adulthood and whatnot, you would feel something was happening. But when we met, which was in 1976, everything came back. Or not everything, but much of our experience as children. And we have, from a very early age, 5, 6, 4, where the craft would pick me up first or George up first, and then we'd pick the other one up. And then we would go, and we would go to a place that was already designated, and it was like a play date. from what we would think of as a play date for kids. And we were given certain tasks to do. And what we understood about this was that one, for example, was we were in the area around South Dakota in the Badlands, and there are great big spires of rocks that are there, and
Sandstone
in a very remote area. And we were building these structures with these little pebbles together as one.
with our mind.
With our mind, we were not holding them at all. And the taller being was there monitoring how we were building what we were building, and whether or not, and this was the very early age, this was, four, to see how we were working as one. This is what we understood later. It was almost like a training period, although for us it was play. And then a couple, just to give you some examples, was we were in a meadow, and we had, we were to actually imagine these flowers and bring them forth from the ground, and they were all different colors and very huge flowers that were flowers from what we were familiar with. And
what they were actually trying to do, which we understood later, is that they were testing to see how ready we were to work together through these bodies, how connected we were, and how we were able to do that in their presence. This is not something we would even have thought of or could do by ourselves.
right.
But they would, at least temporarily, activate the abilities that they knew we had within us, and that how we could do that together, unifying our minds. And so the variety of different experiences that we had with them when they picked us up was mostly for that. Although, when they came, there was never any fear. We recognized them as our friends. And one interesting thing is the tall being, when he was in the ship with us, he was wearing a uniform which was beige, and it had some blue trims, and it was very nice looking, and so was she. But when he was on the ground with us, and we never saw him change, but he had a plaid shirt and khaki pants. And he wanted to show us like he was an uncle, make us at ease. So when we came back in the ship, he would all of a sudden be back in his uniform. And, there was never any discomfort. We were always at ease with them. We were always looking forward to them. One thing that we noticed, of course, afterward, was that they picked us up and they brought us back. We were like, it aged from maybe 4 or 5 to a little later, but there was no missing time. And it's like we had missing time later experiences, but they were very aware of us needing to not be discontinued in our experience in the physical. So they wanted to make sure that our parents, our friends, our siblings would not be missing us. So even though we might be gone for hours, we came back, and the time they picked us up and the time they brought us back was exactly the same. They were able to do that. So also, one of the things that was remarkable is that they would, the moment they brought us back, they would suspend our memory of the event. And the reason they did that was, and we learned later that that's sort of typical with children that are picked up. It was so that it would not interfere with our childhood and our experiences. So we wouldn't be excited and tell our parents who would think we went crazy or, whatever, or our friends at school, for example. So we didn't remember. And later on, of course, when you were ready and it was time, those memories were brought back. So it's not erased, it's just like suspended.
Wow. So you never told this to your parents growing up?
Well, we didn't remember.
But when did these memories come back?
In 1976. However, throughout our earlier adult life or late teen life, we began anything that we had with these beings. There was missing time, so it started to come to our attention that maybe we were living perhaps a different kind of a life than maybe other people were living.
But it was very natural to us.
But it was natural to us. Later in our life, we had this this incredible longing to find each other. We can't explain it, but it was a real
And
deep,
we knew that we were not complete.
right. And
Like there was like a vacuum inside. There was like longing to find the other part. And of course, I came to realize that I was waiting for her, and she was waiting for me. And before we met, shortly before we met, I was working and living in a metaphysical community. So, I had always been attracted to a spiritual life. The Jesuit was one part of it, and then after that, there was a lot of variety of different attractions. And I had transited from a Christian Catholic upbringing to looking more at something more universal. Anyway, during the time that I was living in that metaphysical community called the Initiates in Montreal, there was a person who was doing reading. And she came to me and she said, I have something to tell you. You're about to meet this person who you've always been with, but you're going to meet her, and your relationship is nothing that is that much physical. It's more astral or from another dimension. And that's going to happen soon. So to me, that just confirmed what I already knew. And then there was another person who told everybody else, I wasn't there at the time, that I was going to meet an American girl, and we were going to get married. And so the person who related that message to me told me, if Edith said it, it has to happen. You don't have the choice. So it did happen a few months later.
But getting back to our childhood experiences, again, for us, this was a lot of fun. We have a lot of interesting play dates that we went on, one of which was and we just shared this with Denise a while ago, a couple months ago, we were in the craft that we are so familiar with, and it was, it's a lot, it doesn't take as much time to go from New York to New Brunswick as it would be for driving. So, so we were in the craft, and it was at the winter time, but not, it wasn't deep snow. It was snow, but no leaves on the trees. And we came around a tree, a very large tree, into seeing a two-story house. And in this house was this girl about our age, a little younger, and she was staring out the window, and it was at night. And
so we were hovering above the building, but we could see through the house that girl. They gave us, there were 3 of them at the time. That were with us. And they made it available for us to be able to see that girl underneath the roof, looking out the window towards whatever direction.
Outside. And as if she were in a trance. Now, next to the girl was a gray that was stroking her cheek like this in a very loving way. All we can say was this loving expression.
She didn't seem to be aware of the gray. She might have been, but it didn't seem from our perception that she was.
And so we thought, we looked at that as this memory came back, and we were very aware that we felt it was Denise as a young girl. So we went to Denise and said, do you have any idea? We saw you in a second story.
But we were told at the time that we would meet her later. We're just kids at the time. And we, of course, did not remember that until much later.
That we would meet her later, and there was a special bond here, a special relationship, and not to know anything more, but to be aware. And so we said, we asked her, well, what was your childhood home? And because it was around the age where she would be around 7 or so ish. And she said, well, I was in a Cape Cod house. Well, for us, Cape Cod house, and it was Connecticut, and we knew it was New England, but we didn't know where in New England. She said Connecticut, and we said, well, that's pans out. And she said Cape Cod house, and I thought, oh, a Cape Cod house is only 1 story. That can't be it. That, you know, that's not it. And she said, well, no, in the back of the house, it's 2 stories. We said, oh, this is better. It was on the top story.
And
it was on the top story.
We asked her if there was any trees there, and then she mentioned that there was a big willow tree behind where we were actually.
Right.
And so that was what we had seen.
So she sent a picture of, well, of a house close by, and one of her when she was at the, actually it was a picture that we said this is exactly who it was that we saw, and she was with her sister in the picture, and it was just amazing. Her little bangs were there, little hair in the back, and it seemed like this was a match. So we shared that with Denise, and it was something that was really kind of an interesting fact that we found that, yeah, there is a connection here.
Now there was a lot of memories of when we were later on as young adults or teenagers. Of course, we did not physically know each other then, but I had quite a few incidents where I would all of a sudden find myself in a place where I hadn't been. And each time that happened, I didn't notice so much missing time. I wasn't carrying a watch. I was usually in nature. But there was an elation of joy that was so great that I had never experienced that any other time than at those times. And there was something I wanted to say. I just went, I have a senior moment.
You guys are doing great.
Yeah, it's, yeah.
Well, there was a time where we were living we used to live there, but we had moved away, and we came to visit relatives that were still living there, which is called Colette West, which is a very small burg. And so we were staying there for a few days, and I was very religious at the time, and I was going to walk to the church, which was about 1.5 miles from there. And I found myself all of a sudden having walked that 1.5 miles. And I looked back, and there was a little brook that I could see way back that I should have walked by and didn't remember doing it. But I had, again, that elation that was overwhelming. So I decided to continue to walk to the church. And all of a sudden, we had a lot of cousins there, the huge families, and everybody's kind of a cousin. But I didn't know those cousins too well. They lived right the other side of the railroad track. They came rushing out of the house. There were 3 or 4 younger kids and one that was a adolescent, a teenager. And they just came rushing to me. I didn't know them that well. Somehow they recognized me, but it was the way they were looking at me. They were like in awe. I couldn't, I was in that kind of trance myself, so I didn't make it seemed okay and normal at the time. It's when after I looked at it afterward. So they walked me all the way to the church, didn't have a word to say. Then they turned back and went home. But it was just a very unusual experience.
Which is what we found after we were brought back. This elation stayed for a long time, especially as we were a little older. It just did not go away for quite a while. So that was in itself a clue that we were perhaps getting ready for something. And then when we met, we realized that that all of this was in preparation. Now, what is it in preparation for? You know, this is what probably every experiencer goes through. Well, why do I have this experience? What is it for? What is it serving? Knowing that there is a purpose, and that purpose is to help us move from where we're at, which sometimes in humanity we get so stuck and so ingrained in
what appears to be real.
what appears to be real, to this next step that we're all facing as humanity, to move into that idea of universal love and oneness. And so these were things that once we finished our childhood lessons that we think of childhood lessons, we went into, again, when we met, we just found that the next step for lessons were really to open to what spiritual transformation was all about. And this is the next step we're all taking. And that there's so much help with all of the different species that are here to help humanity through this step. And so we'll fast forward to when we went to, when we started, when we actually met Denise in person. And we can tell you, when we met her in person in Orlando, which was a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, January, February, this was the very first time we ever told our story. We have written many things in a storybook version of that we have shared with people, but we never said that this was our story. And it was we look back on it now, and the fact that we have this connection, we believe, or I do definitely, that this is what actually spurred us forwards to say, now is the time. Time for what? We're all going to find out.
Yeah, we do feel we have a connection with Denise, and she has told us that she also feels that real connection. And we will discover what that means in the future, whatever that means. But
you were going to say something, Denise?
Yeah. We're not going to disclose completely some of the things that we're trying, but we're making some attempts at making connections with something, because I can say that I recall this mass of, if you want to call it the universal being, if you want to call it a group of beings, if you want to call it whatever, that directed us to meet.
That's right.
Right now.
Yeah.
Right now, and to move forward with something. We don't know what that something is, but as soon as I looked at their eyes, and I knew there's something through the eyes that have connected us. And we're supposed to be exercising something, the three of us, that will make some sort of, I don't know if it's a difference or if it will complete the connection. I don't know. We're working on something. And when they showed up at my meeting, and I didn't see them at first because I didn't know anything about them or really who they were. But then when I saw them, I could not take my eyes off. It's like a soul connection. It's something that says the beings have told us we're supposed to be doing this. We're a part of the whole. Where's the rest of the whole? And then I could see this huge, we're unable to describe to someone else what it looks like or feels like. And so they said to me, and I said to them, where do we go with this? We chose you because you're not a huge NBC, CBS, etc. station. There's a listening group that would probably be interested to hear about this. and maybe have some comments, maybe ask some good questions. And it won't get out there where people will go crazy with ideas that, oh, how can we power this by numbers and dollar signs? That's not what we're looking for, because we really don't know what we want to do. So we chose you today for the three of us to be here, just to see what happens. And to see what kind of questions we get and who comes forward. And perhaps they're a part of what this is supposed to be also. And boy, we hesitated. We talked about this behind the scenes. What do we do? Should we do it? Should we try? There's something that connects this whole thing. And the connection is about that far apart. I can't even describe the why, the wherefore, the how of it that we're working on, and what's going to happen when the connection meets.
So this would be the first time, George and Judith, that you've decided to come out publicly?
Yeah, public.
Yes.
Well, we have talked, like when we were at the meeting in Orlando. I couldn't stop myself. I have a big mouth, so I just let it all out. And so that's where it started. But we had decided, the two of us, to talk about it at that time.
Okay.
And maybe a couple other places we mentioned it, you know, some meetings. But if we want to say a disclosure coming out of the closet, this would be it, yes.
Okay. Well, my first time was with Denise, and during the Japanese filming, and it really helped, really, because I was, like we've talked about, early before the filming, that I went through a breakup, and I was somewhat alone, and my mom passed away, so I moved in with my dad. I sold my house, moved in with him. So when Audrey Hewins sort of gave out a call to the experiencer friends that she had on Facebook, if some of them wanted to be on the a Japanese show, I said yes. So I contacted Audrey, and we did a 2-hour Skype, and we had so many experiences that were similar, especially the one that she a voice told her that her sister would be with child, and it turned out that I went through the same experiences with my brother. So we had a lot of things going on. So when I moved, when I traveled down to Maine to meet everyone, then everything felt like family. So because I didn't know that there were other people like me out there, so seeing that there were really was invigorating, and I felt like a sort of release, like stress that went away. And a lot of them are really good friends now. And after that, we're still in contact, and hopefully when this quarantine ends, I'll be able to travel down to the States and meet everyone. But yeah, it's coming out was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. So I know how you feel when as soon as you're with other people that want to listen to your story, it really comes out, and it doesn't stop.
And to look for the right connection, and why we are what we are, and where is it supposed to go? It's supposed to go somewhere. What's the next step? But something's telling us to be very cautious.
It's like this real precious jewel that's been given to us, and we're the caretakers of it. And the caretakers, we have to look at it and say, as much as we love taking care of the jewel, we don't want anything to happen to it. And this is really important, because we look at the steps that humanity are ready to take at this point, and moving from a fear-based point of separation to going to looking at love as being the answer to everything. This is that precious jewel, and we we know that the way that it is then presented will help people to open their hearts, or we don't want them to be afraid and close more. And this is important. Denise, you were.
And that's basically, you know, what Audrey and Debbie were looking at, and that group, that was like that kind of family who were able to express their caring for each other. And the group spoke only of how this would benefit.
Yes.
It was called Starborn. That was the name of who they were. Yeah, and they lost funding. They lost what was keeping them going, keeping them on their feet. It just they just weren't able to do it beyond a certain point, which was a shame. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. You know, when we first met, and that was in Montreal. You know, as I wrote, I was at the time teaching in Pennsylvania, which was actually 800 miles away. And it was during a Christmas break, you know, it was the break for teaching. And a friend said, well, you know, I'm going to Montreal for Christmas holiday. Do you want to, for a few days? It's 800 miles, right? And you know the snow that is in through Pennsylvania to Montreal in Christmas time. I said, sure, we'll go. And so I went, and that's when we actually met. And from there on, we were actually traveling 800 miles on weekends one way to connect, so that we would
and it didn't matter at that time.
We would continue with that looking more deeply into what it was, why were we brought together, and why was this so strong. And then finally, when we did, we said, oh, traveling is just not doing it here. 800 miles on the weekend, one way.
So I became American.
Right. so eventually, right, George came to finish out. And you know, all the time, as you can imagine, you're brought into different experiences. How, you know, in teaching was a very important part at the time. I was teaching special needs kids, from learning disabilities to those with mental handicap, and whatever teaching I was doing, everybody said, well, how are you doing this with these kids? And because these kids were such precious souls that came into these bodies that had so much to give to this planet, and I never saw them as disabled, so to speak. Oh. And there was so much that occurred during this time. They said, you know, what are you doing? First of all, I refused to grade anybody, which was a very big thing in the public school system. I had to go up to the school board and everything else. What do you do? And I said, I will write. I will have a writing, and I will make my thing, and I will do I will do a commentary to the parents, and we'll do it this way, but I will not do grading. If you want to hire me and you want to keep me on, those are my stipulations. And it was very perplexing to them, because we had kids that were reading way above their grade level, and they were called, you know, mentally handicapped. And but we had everything. We had, you know, I had kids reading under desks instead of at the desks. So, you know, it was very perplexing. So when George and I got together, he came down and he would help in the school. So it was, he was my teacher's aide, so to speak, not paid, volunteer.
Still only speaking French.
That's right, still speaking French. But
no, I knew a little English.
A little English. But
well, because where I came from in New Brunswick, it's kind of bilingual, but it's more than bilingual, because in the morning you have a teacher that teaches all the subject in French. In the afternoon, all the subject are in English. That's the best way to really confuse a kid.
So we finished up the school year, and then all of these things started to happen. And again, we
But when we came together, actually what came forward in our memory much more than our childhood experiences was who we were, where we came from, and why we were there, and going way back. And we've always been together. And we won't get into that right now, but we realized that we had to start this journey where everything that we did would be guided, and we wouldn't do anything else. So we went through a whole lot of experience where we were working with them, and they were not only teaching us and having us unlearn a whole lot of stuff that you learned here that you need to let go, but also helping us to open to an understanding that comes when you let go of what you're so attached to as far as concepts. And shortly after, we started again this organization, which stayed open until 2018, I guess. Yes, in Montreal. We were not always there because we had other things we were doing.
Oh, that was in Michigan.
That was in Michigan. But one we just want to brief into is that in 1990, we were guided to start what we call a star system. And that meant that we would be planting these triangles, which are aluminum, along with a crystal that was going to be in the middle.
Now,
And
the crystals come from Brazil. It was we looked for a mine that was exactly what we
of the purest sort.
Of the purest sort, right?
So we didn't know it was the purest sort, but after we're guided to get the crystal from there, we understood that. Now we actually ended up forming a map because a structure.
Now,
because we.
Oh, now these crystals that we had, we would clear them in the pyramid, so they stayed usually 48 hours in the pyramid. We had a solution that we put them in, and once they were, we called them cooking them, but that wasn't
baking them, right?
Baking them, and once they were cleared, we would put them in a place, and then those were the ones we would use for the planting.
Now we planted 6 of much larger ones that formed a structure, and we'll show you that. And then there were between 1,100 and 1,200 of these.
The smaller ones.
That we planted all over the United States, in strategic places in Canada and in Mexico. Now we wanted to just mention just how, again, we go by guidance, right? So and everything is given to you only a little at a time. And this is, Denise can share that, you're only given what you need to for the next step. And so we were in meditation, and the whole star system didn't come at that particular time, but they said, well, you need to plant well, you can explain that, but when we started to plant these little ones, we thought, oh, this isn't so bad. We know exactly where it's northern Michigan. We know where it's supposed to be. Piece of cake, right? And so we go up there, and we have dowsing rods, which we use to get the exact spot, right? We're really meticulous. We were going to do this, and it was going to be the right spot no matter what. Right? But we were guided to that spot.
Yeah. Right. So we still had, to get the exact one. We were going to dig, and it was up in northern Michigan, the first one. It took us well over 3 hours to find the exact. Well, I think it needs to be 2 inches over. No, it needs to be. Let's go into meditation and so 2 hours. We did the first one. We got back after doing that one. We were exhausted.
We said, then how many of these are we going to plant?
And we got the answer, over 1,000. We said, no, this is going to be like with walkers doing this.
So
1,000. We said, no, we just did one.
After we planted the larger one, which was supposed to be establishing perimeters of some structure. There was one in Michigan, in Sturgis, Michigan, and the other one was to be in Seaside, Oregon. There's a mountain where Actually, it's right by the water, by the ocean, and that's where Lewis and Clark established a
salt
cairnade right there.
Right.
We knew that afterward. And then there was one to be, and then we were told that it had to be forming an equilateral triangle. So the distance that was between that one and the one in Sturgis, there had to be another one that would form a triangle at equal distance. So we found that it was in Mazatlan, Mexico. So we went there, did that. If we had more time, we'd tell you the story of that one, which was quite interesting.
But we'll show you the picture and just briefly.
Well, afterward, we knew that there was another triangle that was to be formed. One was in northern Canada. And anyway, we'll show you the design that it ended up forming. And let's see, I don't know if you can see it.
Oh my God.
Gives you an idea?
Yeah.
Now the center point, which is here, is which we found, is close to a little town called Crestone, Colorado.
Which is in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains.
Right.
Now, if we get
Denise
it closer,
that spot.
get it closer, you see some dots.
Smaller dots.
Smaller dots.
Yeah.
These are all what we call the anchor point, which are these here.
Those are the smaller ones.
Yeah. So we became a little more adept in doing this. It came a little easier. We got it right away. We didn't have to go in deep meditation. And a little more self-confident. And it took us, actually, we're not doing this full time because we're doing a lot of other things. But it took us about 2.5 years to cover the whole area. And sometime we may talk a little bit more of what that is, because this is just 2-dimensional. And it creates something that is 3-dimensional, and it has a whole process and a whole purpose for it, which someday we may share, because it would take a while to go into it.
Again, what we found was that this is just part of what is being done in order to ground that energy of love that is here to be expressed.
And as this planet is moving into another dimension or a higher frequency, this is all part of what was being done in order to help that process, which is happening now.
We come to understand that the relationship is far more than what we're seeing with our eyes, and far more than just this experience now, that we've been brought together. It's like we find each other. And so what brings us together, the beings that we call our friends, or that those that we've been working with, and those that Denise is familiar with, they're already working with each other.
Yeah.
And we're just now saying we're available. Now it's time. It's okay.
And whatever, because we have come to know that there is a purpose, a very clear purpose, and it's been working through in Denise's life and our life, to eventually, when it was time, but also when we're ready, to come together for the next stage. And we trust that, and we're not in control of that. It's going to happen. Yes, Denise.
And the people out there that are saying they feel like something's about to happen, and it's increasing. It's increasing now. And are people awakening to what this is? We think so.
Yeah.
We think so.
Absolutely. Yes.
Do you know the purpose of planting the triangles and the crystal? The purpose of...
Well, we can talk a little bit. We can talk a little bit about it, but it would be too involved right now to get into details.
Yeah.
But the planet has kind of what we call in the physical body meridians. It's ley lines, you probably all heard about. And the ley lines here has to be activated. They have to be repaired. They have to be put together, and this system is there to help do that. Okay, so to repair and to activate the ley lines on the planet. That's one of the purpose. The other one would be a little longer to explain and probably needs some pictures.
Okay.
Some drawings.
That's fine. Your story a bit reminds me of Susie Hansen's story from, she's from New Zealand. She growing up, she also went through these periods of training on board craft. Could you, like you were describing, I guess you were balancing stones on one another. Was that telepathically?
Oh yeah.
Were there other types of training? Were there other types of training?
Yes, actually. Yes, there was. And it was different depending on the age group that we're referring to. Very early, the pebbles were one of the main things that we did that we remember. One time we were in a meadow. This was probably again northern states, southern Canada, and we were having to work with. They looked like you might have played a game with cards when you were little, and you'd stack them up and you'd make all different shapes, and these were like cards that you would have. They were rectangular and crystal formation. And so you've seen blueprints, just a blueprint drawing. And this was like a blueprint drawing, but three-dimensional. Kind of like a three-dimensional chess game, like they have three-dimensional chess game. But this was like a three-dimensional blueprint with these cards that were made out of like a transparent crystal-like formation, and we were to make one figure out of this together using only our minds and our thought, and we would build this immense form. And that was one thing. The other thing was when we were younger, we were playing hide and seek, but what was fun about this was that we were to follow this tube that is between our hearts, and we were to run to a spot and then follow this rope, this tube that
it's a tube of light.
A tube of light.
It can look on the outside kind of like a rope.
But it is through the heart. And as kids, we were to go into the most obscure place, hiding in that area, and then
the other one was to follow
this rope,
and also to find the other person intuitively.
Right. So, but only through this light that connected us in the heart.
That connects us.
That does connect us. And so we were learning this at an early age, and we weren't going to be let go of, meaning to be brought back, until we learned it.
But it was not like to develop any psychic ability.
Right.
But it was, they would activate this possibility that we already have to see how ready we were to work together mentally. And we briefly talked about the experience at Badlands. But twice we remember, the first time they had just a pile of these little pebbles that we were to our mind to raise up in the air, and then we were kind of playing, throwing it at each other. Okay, we were not doing anything else. But then the second time it was a little more complex, where they asked us to form figures. They would not indicate to us what kind of figure to form. But one of us made a cow, the other one made a wheelbarrow. I don't remember which one was which. But these pebbles were kind of interlocking. Where were we when we left you?
Okay, the story just before the cow thing?
Before the cow!
Yes.
The cow and the wheelbarrow.
There, you got the cow in the wheelbarrow. That was where we left.
That was about it. Just mentioned that after that, when we were done there, the lady was in the ship that was hovering but invisible, and then it would become visible, and we'd be picked up through a shaft of light through the bottom, and we'd go home.
Okay. Wow. Do
And
you,
then forget all about it.
regarding the your interaction with the beings, were there? So, okay, so you've talked about a humanoid-looking being. Were there other types of beings on the craft, or that you might have seen?
There are other beings that we have seen. They were not on this particular craft when we were children. Later on, we have memories of being in meetings, workshops,
Where there were different races.
gatherings of a variety of different.
Do you want to talk about the last one? No. Okay. Well, usually, right. Usually we have not had any real interaction.
I'm the shy one, you know.
That's right.
Oh,
And I'm the big mouth. Okay. So she gives me a.
Yes.
that's all right.
Oh, sure. We have this thing going, which works well. So,
Well, we have to say that, and Denise can certainly attest to that. You know, we come together and we feel the presence of these beings that are more like our family.
Mm-hmm.
And this sometimes can be so overwhelmingly powerful for energy that sometimes it's just overwhelming. I will sometimes just shake or get very weepy, or it is just a very, the connection is so, we can't say intense. Well, it is intense, but it's so personal. This is why, again, we look at protecting that, because it is so precious. And we know that as we're all opening to this, and that's inside of all of us, that immense potential to love and to connect to all beings, no matter what form they are, it is a powerful experience. So when I say, well, I'm the shy one, sometimes it may be a little bit more selfish because I don't want to just shake and weep in front of you, but it's.
But when she does, I have a chance to talk.
Well, it's like trying to describe a final healing of everything coming together the way it's supposed to be. And if you can see what's there or know what's there, but you can't describe it, there's no way to describe it. And you know that there are all these beings or entities or what the whole is. You can only talk about so much, and it's what we're supposed to be, but the change is coming and you have to do something about it. And it's not what people think. It's not, well, that's all I guess I can say. There's not any other way to put it. And people know. They can feel it. They can sense something coming. And people are recognizing they have a guide, an escort, an entity. They've seen them, but like I have a very intelligent woman just now who she doesn't believe, but she has to go out every night and watch the display. She brings her little dogs who turn right around and go back inside the house. But they're not real. But there's a group that sparkle. They display for her and they sparkle, and there's a big one. And if I say to her, a big what? A big one what? Well,
it's just
but I don't believe in them. Well, then what are they? A big one and a sparkler. And that's as far as she's gotten.
Yeah.
As far as she's willing to go for right now.
Yes.
But it's still with her.
Yeah.
It's still with her.
I told you before the incident in Gulf Breeze. Did I? Yeah. It's
Yes,
kind of
you
the
did.
same thing.
Yeah. We have 3, 4, 10 like that. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
The big, the little, the sparkles, the this, the that, and well, what are they? I don't know, because I don't believe in them.
I don't want to know.
Because if I knew, then I'd have to believe.
Then
Yeah.
I'd have to believe. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And it would change my life.
Yes, it definitely would.
well, when I saw my first craft, when it came overhead, the first time that I did a C5, that's when I realized that, satellites were actually moving in space. I thought they were fixed in orbit.
Uh-huh.
So when I saw
Oh.
that, I thought it was so beautiful to see a white light move.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so, I was super hyped. And then the second day, that's when we called in the craft. Of course, I wasn't really expecting anything, but
Uh-huh.
it just came in. We were on the front lawn, and it flew sort of diagonally so we could see it. And, the whole thing lasted for about a minute, and nobody in the neighborhood saw it. Everybody was outside. This was late August.
Uh-huh.
And it was, hot. The children were outside. This was around 9:45. So, the sun was down, but there was still sunlight out. And it
Mhm.
came in, and it was totally mind blowing. These things change your whole view of life.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
But,
true.
I guess I was brought into it slowly, so I didn't really go cuckoo. But again, it was so beautiful that you're in awe, and
Yeah.
you can't
Yeah.
go berserk. All you can do is look at it, and that's what happened. And oh my God, we just saw a UFO. It's really it's amazing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Now,
True.
George and Judith, now you were talking about flying in the craft. I don't recall being in one, so I'm really curious. Could you describe the insides, perhaps? Do you recall that?
You mean how it was when we were in the craft?
Yeah, how did it look like?
Well,
We can describe a bit, but again, when we were kids, we were just so thrilled with
the beings that were our friends. Yeah.
right, and we do remember even at that young age, there were screens that were much like what we have, with flat screen televisions. Only it was at the time, of course, they were screens. We did one we had where we could see through the floor. There was which was really interesting because when I have a specific memory of when we went to pick George up, and this was and we found the place later. He was running in the woods and then through a path, and first walking and then running.
I wasn't running away from. I was just a runner when I was a kid.
Right.
I wasn't aware that it was coming.
Right, and we could. I remember distinctly seeing him, and of course, the floor where I was. First, I could see. Because this is what we would call, this was a small craft. We started calling them just the little Zotter machines because they were smaller. They were not even large like
But
you
it's
would think of a
disc,
Scout disc
type.
shape.
Yeah.
But I could see him through the floor, even though the floor was solid, through the floor running, and he turned around and saw what was happening, and he fell. He tripped.
Because I was looking up and kept running.
And he kept running.
I didn't think about stopping, so I tripped and fell on my back.
So when he was on his back, that's when he was brought into the craft. From that point. So it hovered over him while he was on his back looking up, and that was a very vivid memory. We must have been maybe 5 and 7. We're 2 years apart, but it was around that age group at each time.
One of the memories that I have was that, and I showed you where that was in New Brunswick, where it was a secluded place in the woods, and the ship came about, kind of went this way and then came towards me, and I knew what it was, of course, at that time, and it landed actually, and Judith was aboard, and there was only this one tall being that we're so familiar with. Now, as you go in there, it's like you have all the screen and what you call it, the levers and everything else, although it's all electronic, but it's mostly work mentally. We don't touch it, right? So back behind that section, even though it's a small ship, it looks a lot bigger inside. And in the middle, you have like a, it looks like kind of a glass, but it's more like a zoom lens, all right? And it's very thick, and you can see through it. Now, there are some benches mostly all around it where you can see. So you can sit, and so you can see through it. Now, so you can see, but you can also see something,
Right.
even if you're very high up in the air, you can see it very close. So it's adjustable. Now, we were not adjusting it, but somebody was, so that it magnifies as needed.
Medical examination, did you ever?
No, nothing like that.
We never did.
No, we understand that happens a lot,
Yeah.
and you know, it's usually explained what's going on and why they do it. So, or at least there's a lot of theory out there. No, that never has happened to us.
Okay.
It was not at all about that.
Have they ever told you where they were from?
Where we're from, or
No, where they
they're
were
No.
from.
No, and that was
Well-
not something that we do know from, but it's not something that we would ask them, or it's not something that they would talk to us about, but it's something that we have come to know.
Okay.
You see, because it's not just information that they give us, not so much. They've been working with us into developing our intuition and our ability to remember. So a lot of the things that we have learned came from that, from our ability to remember. So a lot more than information that they would give us directly.
Okay. Wow. So Denise, do you remember, do you recall ever looking out through that window?
I do.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So,
And I know what they're talking about. I know what can you call it? That place of being.
okay.
You just know, you remember after a while.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So did your experiences continue like during your teens or you know, early adulthood and so on?
Yes.
And Judith and George, did your experiences also continue growing up? Like up to this day, do you still have contact?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So, wow. Yeah, I know it's
But even though,
mind-blowing. Go ahead.
I think that it becomes not so much a visitation, but a connection.
Yes. Yes. That's a good way of putting it.
yes, because in the beginning we had a lot of physical experience with them, and even growing up, it has happened less and less physically. We are remembering some of them because they're re-educating us in trying to understanding that we are not physical. We are
Right.
just having a physical experience, but that's not who we are. And that our relationship with them is becoming a lot more metaphysical and spiritual.
And very recently I've been able to step into a place, and it sounds very odd, is two off my right shoulder that I stepped into, and I saw a place that I can't stay, but I see my escort and I see other beings like us. I can visit there for just a brief period of time, and I have to step back to this place in a physical body. But I know it's there. I can sense it now.
And it's right next to you.
Yes, it's right. It's right
That's what
here.
you were saying, right?
It's right here. Yeah.
That's
Yes,
right.
exactly. Exactly.
We tend to think that is geographically far away,
It's not. No. The place, if you want to, some of us will call it the next place. And for some of us,
Yeah.
we can go right on through there to the one after that, but it's right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Now, Judith and George, I'm not sure, did you want to get into the story that you two might have known each other before incarnation, or is that too personal right now?
You mean before?
Well, I think Denise
I
told me
didn't
that you
follow
two might have known each other.
Well, it says
before.
children, I think,
Okay.
but I don't know if you would call it life. We have past lives, though. We have past lives.
We're missing most of this.
Is it
Okay.
Well,
He's
ours is.
talking. He's speaking of past lives that you might have had and known each other. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and past lives where experiences where we have perhaps touched upon where Denise has had her experience in places where we may have crossed paths. Yes.
Okay.
But definitely, we've always been together whenever we have come here.
Okay.
And
So,
there's, yes.
They actually saw me in a lifetime where I was on a liquid planet, and we
Oh,
started
yeah.
to
That's right.
we started to compare notes about the entities that lived in the one space that wasn't liquid when they visited there, and that comparison was very interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So can we get into that? Is that too personal, or?
You want to talk about your vacation, Denise?
That's what it was.
She said, I had enough of this. I need a break.
You see, we've been comparing notes. I chose to come back to a planet that was mostly liquid. I don't know what held it together. I have no idea. But it was a thick, it wasn't water. It was a thick, almost gel-like substance. And it was more or less for R&R, rest and recuperation from something. I have an idea what it was, but I would come to an area where it was kind of land, but it was to speak to the entities that, I don't know, I wouldn't say owned and operated that planet, but they were in charge of it. And George and Judith visited. And so that I would want them to describe because they knew I was there.
Yes, we were very much aware that these beings that were actually on land, although you could see them when you were in this substance where you could breathe in
Underwater.
this underwater, but it wasn't water. It was a fluid that actually went in through your body, but you could breathe there with no effort whatsoever. So it's almost like when you say rest and relaxation, it is, you are totally in bliss.
Like when you went underwater in this experience, Denise, you were really at home.
Your deep cave diving, when you were describing it, it is no sound. There is this otherworldly experience, being enveloped in this substance, which is vibrant and yet soothing.
But the beings that, because we came to that planet a few times, and we were contacting certain people, a couple of people that we met and were in relationship with on that planet, and they also could spend as much time as they wanted on underwater, and everybody could, but it was very healing, invigorating, whatever, that beings love so much to be there in that light water.
It is light water.
But when we came there, we were not adjusting to be having bodies that the beings there had. We weren't the ones that we usually have when we travel.
So we were on land, and we were talking to a being on land, which was a very beautiful, as soothing as it is underwater, it is as soothing on land.
Yes. Yeah.
So these beings, they were telling us that this person that we really felt was Denise was ready to go back now.
Mhm.
She was finishing her
vacation.
Her vacation.
Uh-huh.
and she was
Yeah.
but it's like, you know, the R&R in this location, you become that fluid.
You do. Yeah.
You really do. So when this being, which was a beautiful, it's hard to describe the body of
Mhm.
this being, because it is such an unusual body form.
Very different.
Very different. And saying that Denise, who was there, this was one who was ready to go back to continue her assignment, to continue her job.
Yeah.
You know, the vacation was over.
It was done. It was done. Yeah, and the beings in the water, including myself, were all the same color as the liquid. Just yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And had bodies that were as easily able to live underwater as on land.
Yeah.
But what we felt was interesting is that at the point where the being we were talking to said, well, you're ready to go back, you were taking that which you had all through your body to the next experience. It's not that you went with the water body, but you went with all that which permeated you at that time.
From the water substance.
Yes.
But I learned how to escape some of the things that I experienced here that were stressful by taking up scuba diving. And underwater, we went into the Florida aquifer.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as my head went beneath the surface, I left this planet behind again.
That's probably the quality that you acquired on that planet.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to do that. Yeah.
I always had far more air left than anybody else on the team that I dove with.
Interesting.
If I went into a place called Blue Springs, I have over 250 dives there, down into the cave, and I would find a ledge and just lie down on it. And I would say to myself, when's the last time you took a breath? Because, and you have to breathe here. And so I would do that and look, and when I would surface, I had plenty of air left. It was just the time underwater that would cause me to have all kinds of problems if I didn't surface on time.
If you didn't surface, yeah.
So, I must have recalled, and I still do, thinking about it, that I didn't need to breathe. So
when did this happen?
When was I on that planet?
Yeah.
I had one big lifetime before this one. A women's rights advocate was my main. I wasn't known for that. My middle name now is my first name there, but the one before that.
Okay. Wow. So
I believe.
Okay.
So it's still with you.
Say that again.
I said it's still with you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm glad you two came on, because I know a lot of, nowadays a lot of companies tend to try to not steal your story, but they acquire your story, and you can't even talk about it anymore because you sign your rights away, and they tend to, again, they want to use you as a ways to make money, and a lot of people, they do show up and they want your story, and the fact that I've got my own audience, but you know, the people that will resonate with your story will find your story.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what, you know, when I came out, people that came to me, well, the information I put out, they resonated with it, they corroborated because they went through the same experience. So whatever you went through might trigger somebody else, and that's the healing part of coming out.
Right.
Well, we'd like to know if you have questions from some of your audience, if you have people that email you, call in, that type of thing, because we're exploring some areas that we're looking for answers for a certain type of connection, and we don't know when it will come. We expect that it's going to, something we're exploring.
Okay.
We're told to explore, I think. It's our next set of instructions.
And to be available.
Yes, to remain available.
Available.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully anyone that does come out and email me, I could, you know, easily forward it to you guys. And anybody watching, I hope you guys really like this show. More experiencer interviews coming up, and I'll see you guys next time. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yannick.
Thank you again. Thank you, Denise, for introducing us.